The night before my wedding, I overheard my fiancé laughing with his friends, saying I was just a temporary choice until someone better came along. The next morning, as he stood at the altar, I walked in, but not to marry him. Instead, I had a surprise that brought him to his knees. I never intended to be the bride who devastated her fiancé, not in marriage, but in utter ruin. Yet, life has a peculiar way of rewriting your story when you least expect it. The night before my wedding, destiny handed me a truth I never sought, and today, I would return the favor. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these tales of empowerment, please consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's get started. Harrison Montgomery and I had been together for 3 years. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, and from a highly respected family. His mother, Diana, had become like my own, filling the void left by my parents' passing. His sister Claire was the best friend I'd always wished for. Everything was perfect, or so I believed. The bachelor party was held at the Grand Hotel, just down the street from our penthouse. I hadn't planned to go there that night, but I'd forgotten to give Harrison his grandfather's cufflinks, a special request from Diana for the ceremony. The hotel staff knew me well. Harrison and I had hosted numerous charity events there. They directed me to the private lounge without question. That's when I heard it. Harrison's distinct laugh, followed by words that would shatter my world. "Come on, man. You can't be serious about settling down with Sophia." His best friend Blake's voice carried through the partially opened door. "Why not? She's perfect on paper," Harrison replied, his words slightly slurred. "Her trust fund will help expand Montgomery Enterprises, and her connections are invaluable. Besides, she's completely devoted to me." Laughter erupted, but it was his next words that turned my blood to ice. "She's just temporary anyway, until someone better comes along. Someone more suitable for the long term." I stood there, clutching the velvet box containing the cufflinks as my entire world crumbled. 3 years of memories flashed before my eyes, but now they were tainted with a new perspective. The late-night business calls, the unexpected cancellations, the subtle ways he'd manipulate my decisions. It all made sense. But I didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I returned home and opened my laptop. As Harrison's business partner, I had access to everything: emails, financial records, client information. 4 hours later, I had enough evidence to destroy not just his heart, but his entire carefully constructed world. The morning of the wedding arrived with an unsettling serenity. My hands didn't shake as I applied my makeup, a stark contrast to the trembling excitement I'd imagined feeling on this day. The evidence I'd gathered lay hidden in a cream-colored envelope, tucked safely in my wedding suite. Diana burst into the room, her eyes glistening with motherly pride. "Sophia, darling, the flowers just arrived, and they're absolutely perfect." She held up my bouquet of white peonies and blush roses, unaware that it would soon become a weapon rather than a symbol of love. As my bridesmaids fluttered around me like elegant butterflies in their champagne-colored dresses, I caught Claire's reflection in the mirror. Harrison's sister stood behind me, adjusting my veil with such tenderness that my resolve almost wavered. Almost. "I can't believe my brother got so lucky," Claire whispered, squeezing my shoulders. "You're going to take his breath away." "If only you knew how right you are," I thought, maintaining my practiced smile. The next hour passed in a blur of hairspray, lipstick touch-ups, and champagne toasts. I couldn't bring myself to drink. Every ping from my phone made my heart race, not from pre-wedding jitters, but from anticipation of what was to come. My private investigator had promised final confirmations by noon. At 11:43 a.m., the text arrived. "Additional evidence secured. The reporter is in position." I excused myself to the bathroom, phone clutched in my trembling hands. The screenshots confirmed everything: Harrison's offshore accounts, the diverted company funds, and most damningly, emails to his mistress discussing their post-honeymoon plans. The same mistress who, ironically, sat on his company's board of directors. A knock at the door startled me. "Sophia, the coordinator, says we have 30 minutes, Claire called out. "Just finishing up," I responded, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I took one last look at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same person who'd spent yesterday morning writing her vows with tears of joy. This woman wore her wedding dress like armor, her red lipstick like war paint. When I emerged, Diana pulled me aside. "I want you to have this," she said, fastening a delicate pearl necklace around my neck. "It's been in the Montgomery family for generations. Harrison's grandmother wore it on her wedding day. The pearls felt like ice against my skin. Another family heirloom that would become part of this day's collateral damage. Thank you, Diana, I whispered, hugging her tightly. I want you to remember that no matter what happens today, you've been more of a mother to me than I could ever hoped for. She looked at me quizzically, but before she could respond, the wedding planner appeared. Headset in place, clipboard at the ready, places everyone. The guests are seated and the groom is at the altar. My bridesmaids lined up, their excitement palpable. Claire kissed my cheek before taking her place at the front of the line. I waited until they'd all left before retrieving the envelope from its hiding place and sliding it into a discreet pocket sewn into my dress. The church doors closed behind them, leaving me alone in the vestibule. Through the heavy wood, I could hear the string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon, the same song Harrison and I had chosen together on a rainy Sunday months ago. My phone buzzed one final time. Reporter and photographer in place. Business. Partners all present. Police contact on standby. I deleted the message and tucked the phone away. The wedding coordinator appeared beside me, radiant with professional cheerfulness. Ready? Miss Grant. I thought of the moment I'd first met Harrison at that charity gala, how his smile had lit up the room. I thought of our first kiss in the rain, the way he'd proposed under the stars in Tuscany, all the dreams we'd shared. Then I thought of his cruel laughter last night, the years of lies, the carefully orchestrated deception. The church doors swung open. The wedding march began to play, and 200 guests rose to their feet. At the end of the aisle, Harrison stood tall and handsome in his tuxedo, beaming with proud, practiced charm. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, that smile would shatter, along with his reputation, his business, and his carefully constructed world. I took my first step forward, clutching my bouquet. The weight of the envelope against my thigh reminded me of my purpose. This wasn't a wedding march. It was a countdown to destruction. Yes, I told the coordinator, my voice still wrapped in silk. I'm ready. Each step down the aisle brought flickers of memories, moments I'd once treasured but now recognized as carefully crafted deceptions. The soft whispers of beautiful bride from the guests felt like bitter ironies against my skin. Harrison's smile grew wider as I approached, his confidence unwavering, the perfect mask of a man who thought he had everyone fooled. 3 steps from the altar, I caught Blake's eye in the front row. His smirk faltered slightly when I held his gaze, perhaps sensing something amiss in my expression. Next to him sat Rebecca Matthews, Harrison's business associate, wearing a tasteful navy dress that I knew cost more than most people's monthly salary, a dress likely purchased with diverted company funds. 2 steps away, and I could see Diana dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Claire stood among my bridesmaids, practically bouncing with excitement. The sight of them made my heart clench, knowing they were about to become collateral damage in Harrison's downfall. One final step. You look stunning, Harrison whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped back, just slightly, just enough. The priest opened his mouth to begin, but I turned to face our audience instead. The envelope felt heavy against my thigh as I reached for it, the sound of the seal breaking echoing in the sudden silence. Before we begin, my voice carried clearly. Through the church, I'd like to share some readings, not from the Bible, but from Harrison's private emails to Rebecca Matthews, dated throughout our engagement. The color drained from Harrison's face as I pulled out the first document. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while confused. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. My dearest Rebecca, I read, my voice steady. Once the wedding secures the merger and Sophia's trust fund is accessible, we can proceed with our original plan. She suspects nothing. The murmurs grew louder. Harrison stepped toward me, but I moved away, pulling out more papers. But wait, there's more, I continued. My smile sharpened like glass. Would anyone like to hear about the offshore accounts? Or perhaps the creative accounting at Montgomery Enterprises? I have copies for everyone, including the SEC representatives who should be arriving right about now. The church doors opened with perfect timing, revealing 2 suited agents. No. Harrison lunged for the papers, but I'd anticipated this. I let the documents scatter, watching as they floated down like toxic snowflakes, each one revealing another layer of his corruption. The photographers I'd planted among the guests captured every moment, their cameras clicking rapidly. Sophia, please, Harrison hissed, grabbing my arm. We can talk about this. I twisted free, facing him with all the cold fury I'd accumulated. Talk like how you talked about me at your bachelor party. Just temporary, wasn't. Until someone better comes along. His face went from white to gray. In the front row, Blake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding everyone's eyes. I trusted you, I continued, my voice carrying through the now silent church. I loved you. But you saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Diana stood up, her face a mask of confusion and growing horror. Harrison, what is she talking about? Mother, I can explain the embezzlement, I interrupted. The affair? The planned merger that would have bankrupted dozens of families. Please, Harrison, explain to everyone exactly who you are. The SEC agents were moving forward now, flanking the altar. Rebecca had already slipped out a side door, but she wouldn't get far. Another team was waiting outside. You've ruined everything, Harrison snarled, his charming facade finally cracking completely. I smiled, reaching up to remove the Montgomery family pearls. No, Harrison, you did that all by yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with. The next few moments dissolved into chaos. The agents moved in. Claire was sobbing. Diana stood frozen in disbelief, and guests were either fleeing or recording everything on their phones. Through it all, I maintained my composure, watching as Harrison's perfect world crumbled around him. As he was led away in handcuffs, Harrison turned back one last time. I did love you, in my way. Your way. I stepped close, keeping my voice low. Your way was never good enough. Consider this my wedding gift. The truth, finally, about the man you really are. I turned away, walking back down the aisle alone, my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Diana's muffled sobs, the continued click of cameras, and the growing buzz of shocked conversations. But ahead of me lay freedom, justice, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes karma needs a little help arriving. On schedule, the spring sunlight hit my face as I pushed open the church doors. A crowd of reporters waited outside, my final touch to ensure Harrison's downfall would be complete and public. As their questions rained down around me, I smiled, knowing that while this wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd once dreamed of, it was something better. It was justice. The following weeks unfolded like scenes from a movie I never thought I'd star in. Headlines screamed Montgomery heirs, empire crumbles, and jilted bride exposes corporate corruption. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from well-wishers and journalists, all eager to hear more about the bride who brought down one of the city's most prominent families. I sat in my new apartment overlooking Central Park, a place I'd chosen specifically because Harrison had always dismissed it as new money territory. The irony wasn't lost on me. My laptop displayed the latest news. Harrison and Rebecca had been indicted on multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. The evidence I'd gathered had opened a Pandora's box of corporate misconduct. Claire called daily, her voice always wavering between anger and desperation. Why didn't you tell me? She'd ask. I could have helped, but we both knew she couldn't have. Her blind spot for her brother had always been her greatest weakness. Diana's reaction surprised me most. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, she appeared at my door carrying a familiar velvet box. The pearls, she said, holding them out. They belong to you now. Diana, I couldn't you expose the truth, she interrupted, her voice firm despite her red-rimmed eyes. That makes you more worthy of these than anyone who's worn them before. We sat on my new sofa, drinking tea from cups I'd bought just that morning. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. I failed him, she finally whispered. Somewhere along the way, I must have. No, I took her hand. Harrison made his own choices. You gave him everything he needed to be a good man. He chose differently. The Montgomery Enterprises investigation revealed deeper corruption than anyone had imagined. Harrison's father had laid the groundwork years ago, and Harrison had merely perfected the art of deception. The company's collapse affected hundreds of employees, but I had prepared for that too. Anonymous tips had helped many transfer their investments weeks before the scandal broke. Blake tried to contact me once, probably hoping to save his own skin. His message sat unread in my inbox, alongside Harrison's desperate attempts at explanation. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Rebecca turned state's evidence. Of course, she'd always been practical that way. Her testimony would ensure Harrison spent a significant portion of his prime years in a federal institution, trading his bespoke suits for prison garb. The media painted me as a hero, the whistleblower bride who chose justice over love. They didn't understand that it was never a choice. The moment I heard Harrison's true feelings, the path forward became crystal clear. Love without respect is like a house built on sand. It's bound to collapse. My own company flourished in the aftermath. Clients appreciated working with someone who demonstrated such unwavering ethical standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harrison's attempt to use me had backfired spectacularly, launching me into greater success than he'd ever imagined. 1 month after the wedding, I received a letter from Harrison's grandmother. Her shaky handwriting filled 3 pages with memories of her own marriage, of watching Harrison grow up, and finally, her gratitude for preventing the family name from becoming synonymous with unchecked corruption. "You did what none of us had the courage to do," she wrote. "You saw the truth and refused to look away." The letter ended with a photograph. Harrison's grandfather on his own wedding day, young and hopeful. The same hope I'd once seen in Harrison's eyes. The same hope that had twisted into something darker when nobody was watching. I kept the photo, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The charming smile that had once won my heart had hidden a calculated mind, plotting my destruction. Never again would I let someone else's mask become my reality. As summer faded into autumn, I found myself walking through Central Park more often. The changing leaves reminded me that transformation, while painful, was necessary for growth. Each step forward took me further from the woman who'd nearly married a lie and closer to someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid of standing alone. Diana joined me for these walks sometimes. We never spoke of Harrison directly, but his absence hung between us like an invisible thread, connecting to women who'd loved and lost the same person in different ways. "You know," she said during one of our walks, "I always wanted a daughter who would carry on the Montgomery legacy of strength and integrity. Turns out, I got one, just not in the way I expected." I squeezed her hand, understanding the weight of her words. In trying to destroy me, Harrison had inadvertently given me something precious, a family bound not by blood or false promises, but by truth and resilience. The media eventually moved on to newer scandals, but the lessons remained. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't saying I do, it's having the courage to say I won't. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I found myself standing in front of Montgomery Enterprises' former headquarters. The building's gleaming facade remained unchanged, but the company's name had been replaced by that of its new owners. Inside, a different kind of energy pulsed through the renovated offices, one of transparency and renewed purpose. I'd been invited to consult on the company's restructuring, a delicious twist of fate that hadn't escaped my notice. The new management wanted to understand how the previous corruption had gone undetected for so long. Who better to explain than the woman who'd uncovered it all? Walking through the familiar corridors, I passed Harrison's old office. It had been converted into a communal workspace, its imposing mahogany doors replaced with glass panels. Sunlight streamed in where shadows once lurked, a fitting metaphor for the company's transformation. Claire had taken over a small division of the company, determined to rebuild her family's legacy the right way. We'd slowly repaired our friendship, stronger now for having been tested. She'd inherited her mother's strength but channeled it into creating positive change. "The quarterly reports show remarkable recovery," she announced during a board meeting, her voice steady and confident. "We've retained 80% of our original workforce and implemented all recommended transparency measures." I watched her with pride, remembering the tearful conversation we'd had 3 months ago when she discovered even more of Harrison's deceptions. Instead of breaking her, each revelation had only strengthened her resolve to make things right. The media had dubbed it the Montgomery Redemption, a story of corporate resurrection led by the women Harrison had underestimated. Diana had emerged from her initial shock to become a fierce advocate for corporate accountability, using her social connections to promote ethical business practices. My own consulting firm had expanded rapidly, with offices now in New York, London, and Singapore. Companies worldwide sought our expertise in fraud prevention and corporate transparency. Each new client brought with them stories of near misses and close calls. Potential Harrison Montgomerys caught before they could. Cause irreparable damage. The investigation had uncovered connections to other prominent families, leading to a domino effect of exposures and resignations. Harrison's circle of privileged conspirators had crumbled, their influence evaporating in the harsh light of scrutiny. Rebecca's testimony had proven invaluable to the prosecution. She'd provided details of meetings in exotic locations, of documents destroyed and accounts hidden. Her cooperation had earned her a lighter sentence, but the stigma would follow her long after her release. Blake had tried to reinvent himself as a whistleblower, claiming he'd always had suspicions about Harrison's dealings. No one bought it. Last I heard, he'd moved to a small town in Montana, his dreams of social climbing buried under the weight of his complicity. Harrison's trial was set for spring. His legal team had attempted every delay tactic possible, but justice had a way of catching up. I'd been called to testify, a prospect that filled me with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received an unexpected call from Harrison's grandmother. "I've been going through old family albums," she said, her voice crackling with age and emotion. "There's something you should see." Over dinner in her elegant townhouse, she showed me photographs of Harrison as a child, images of a smiling boy who once had the potential for goodness before ambition and greed twisted his path. "I watched him change," she confided, her fingers tracing the edges of a yellow photograph. "Year by year, success by success, he became someone I didn't recognize. You saw it too, didn't you?" Before anyone else did. I nodded, remembering subtle moments when Harrison's mask had slipped. A cruel comment here, a dismissive gesture there, signs I'd chosen to ignore until that fateful night before our wedding. "The Montgomery name meant something once," she continued, closing the album. "Thanks to you, Claire, and Diana, it might mean something worthwhile again." As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred into streams of gold and silver. I thought about legacy, not just the Montgomerys, but my own. In choosing to expose the truth, I'd helped create a ripple effect of positive change. The wedding dress still hung in my closet, a reminder not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained. Strength, clarity, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction, building something better from the ashes of deception. Tomorrow, I would meet with another company seeking guidance on ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harrison's betrayal had led me to my true calling. In trying to use me as a stepping stone, he'd inadvertently helped me find my path. The night before my wedding, I'd overheard a truth that shattered my world. Now, 6 months later, I'd helped build a new one, stronger, clearer, and far more authentic than the illusion I'd almost married into. Spring arrived with an unexpected weight. Harrison's trial loomed on the horizon. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the witness stand, my voice unwavering as I recounted every detail. His eyes never left me during my testimony, but they no longer held the power to make my heart race. Instead, I saw him clearly for who he was, a man whose greatest defeat was being exposed for his true nature. The evidence was overwhelming. Each document I'd gathered that fateful night before the wedding became another nail in the coffin of his defense. His lawyers attempted to paint me as a vengeful woman scorned, but the paper trail told a different story, one of calculated fraud spanning years. The most poignant moment came when Diana testified. She sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her elegant composure intact as she detailed how her own son had manipulated family funds and betrayed generations of trust. "The truth," she stated clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "must stand above blood." Harrison's face crumpled at her words. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion break through his practiced mask, the realization that he'd lost not just his freedom, but his mother's unwavering support. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Each day brought new revelations, more evidence of how deep the corruption had run. Former employees testified about threats and coercion. Business partners revealed how they'd been drawn into Harrison's web of deceit. Through it all, I sat in the gallery beside Claire, watching the man we'd both loved reveal his darkest colors to the world. The verdict came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, guilty on all counts. The sentence, 15 years, no possibility of early parole. As the judge read out the terms, I studied Harrison's profile, still handsome, but somehow diminished. The charming smile that had once won over boardrooms, and my heart was nowhere to be seen. Rebecca, having pleaded to lesser charges in exchange for her testimony, received 5 years. She avoided my gaze as she was led away, her designer outfit replaced by prison orange. Blake, charged as an accessory, accepted a plea deal that included community service and hefty fines. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Diana stepped forward, Claire and I flanking her sides. "The Montgomery family," she announced, her voice steady, "has always valued integrity above all else. Today's verdict, while painful, upholds that tradition. We thank the jury for their service and justice for prevailing." Later that evening, we gathered at Diana's townhouse, not to mourn, but to close a chapter. Claire brought out a bottle of champagne, the same vintage we'd planned to serve at the wedding. "To truth," she toasted, her eyes meeting mine, "and to the sister I almost had, who turned out to be more family than my own brother." Diana reached for my hand as we sipped our champagne. "You know," she mused. "I've been thinking about what you said that day at the altar, about love and truth. You chose truth over love, but in doing so, you showed the greatest love of all. Love for justice, for what's right." The evening softened into night, our conversation turning from the past to the future. Claire spoke of her plans to rebrand the remaining legitimate Montgomery businesses. Diana shared her vision for a foundation, supporting corporate ethics education. As I drove home that night, the city skyline glittered against the dark sky. The weight I'd carried since that night before my wedding finally began to lift. Harrison's sentencing wasn't just an ending. It was permission to truly begin again. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo appeared, Harrison in his prison uniform, being led to his cell. Below it, words from a sympathetic guard. "Thought you'd want to see this. Justice served." I deleted the message without responding. I didn't need to see Harrison brought low. I'd already seen him at his highest and found him wanting. My revenge wasn't in his imprisonment, but in the freedom I'd found by exposing the truth. The wedding dress that had hung in my closet like a ghost was finally packed away, donated to a charity that helped domestic abuse survivors rebuild their lives. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. What was meant to be a symbol of love and trust would now help other women write their own stories of redemption. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the girl who'd once dreamed of becoming Mrs. Montgomery. She'd been naive, perhaps, but her belief in justice had been her saving. Grace Harrison had seen her trust as weakness, never realizing it would be his undoing. The truth had cost me a wedding, but it had given me something far more valuable. The knowledge that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding the right partner, but about finding the strength to stand alone for what's right. 1 year after Harrison's sentencing, I found myself back at the Grand Hotel, not as a bride-to-be, but as the keynote speaker for a corporate ethics conference. The irony of speaking in the same building where I'd overheard Harrison's true nature wasn't lost on me. The ballroom was packed with executives, all eager to hear from the woman who'd exposed one of the biggest corporate scandals of the decade. As I stepped onto the stage, my heels clicking against the polished wood, I caught my reflection in the glass panels, confident, poised, and completely transformed from the woman I'd been a year ago. "Good morning," I began, surveying the crowd. "You're here today because you want to learn how to prevent fraud and corruption in your organizations. But what you really need to learn is how to see the truth hiding behind perfect smiles and designer suits." In the front row, Diana and Claire sat proudly. Claire had successfully rebranded the remaining Montgomery assets into a new company focused on sustainable investments. Diana's foundation had already sponsored ethics programs at 3 major universities. "The greatest threat to corporate integrity," I continued, "isn't always external. Sometimes it's the charming CEO with a Harvard degree. Sometimes it's the trusted partner with a flawless track record. And sometimes it's the person you plan to spend your life with." My consulting firm had grown exponentially, with offices now in New York, London, and Singapore. Companies worldwide sought our expertise in fraud prevention and corporate transparency. Each new client brought with them stories of near misses and close calls, potential Harrison Montgomerys caught before they could cause irreparable damage. After my speech, during the networking reception, a young woman approached me. Her hands trembled slightly as she introduced herself. "I'm engaged to my company's CFO," she confided, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last week, I found some discrepancies in our books. After hearing your story, I don't know what to do." I looked at her, seeing my former self reflected in her uncertain eyes. "The truth doesn't get easier to tell," I said gently, "but living with lies becomes impossible once you see them." By the end of the day, another corporate fraud had been prevented, another scandal averted. The young woman, as fiancé, was quietly removed from his position. The authorities notified. She sent me a thank you note a month later, signed with her maiden name and a promise to never settle for less than complete honesty. My story had become a beacon for others, a reminder that choosing truth over comfort wasn't just an option. It was a necessity. Business schools used the Montgomery case as a teaching tool, and I occasionally guest lectured, sharing insights that could only come from having loved and lost a master of deception. Claire joined my firm as a partner, her experience in rebuilding after a corporate scandal proving invaluable. Together, we developed programs to help companies foster cultures of transparency and accountability. "You know," she said one evening as we reviewed case files, "I used to think Harrison was the strong one in our family. Now I realize strength isn't about maintaining power. It's about having the courage to expose wrongdoing, even when it hurts." Diana's foundation launched a scholarship program for women in business ethics, naming it after Harrison's grandmother, who had passed away peacefully months after his sentencing. Her last words to me had been, "You saved our family's soul." The media still occasionally ran stories about the runaway bride who saved Wall Street, but my life had moved far beyond that single day of reckoning. My work had evolved from an act of revenge into a mission of prevention and protection. Harrison's appeals were systematically denied, his attempts to reduce his sentence falling on deaf ears. The evidence I'd gathered that night had been too thorough, too damning, to dispute. Sometimes I wondered if he ever truly understood that his downfall hadn't been caused by my discovery of his plans, but by his own belief that love could be used as a weapon. 1 year after exposing the truth, I stood in my office overlooking Central Park, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of redemption. On my desk sat a framed photo of Diana, Claire, and me at the opening of the Foundation's first Ethics Center. Next to it lay a small velvet box containing the Montgomery family pearls, no longer a symbol of betrayal, but a reminder that sometimes the most precious inheritance is the courage to stand for what's right. The truth hadn't given me the happy ending I'd once dreamed of. Instead, it had given me something far more valuable: a purpose, a mission, and a family bound not by blood or false promises, but by shared conviction.